Hello, we're back with another chapter from The Stars Above. A very beautiful chapter, very magical, very wondrous, very waking dream. But before we get into that, I'd like to give a shout out to today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Snazzy Shoes. Snazzy Shoes are today's sponsor. I know that some people would argue that dress shoes are not intended for harsh terrains like the desert or mountains or spelunking, things of that sort in nature. But I'd argue that my versatility in these snazzy shoes are much greater than any sneaker that I could ever wear. That's for sure. So yeah, snazzy shoes. Get them while they're hot. All right. Chapter 3. Instruction from Zoltar. I've undergone severe insomnia since childhood, and what sleep I managed to get in that studio had been plagued with night terrors which felt to breach reality. It became familiar to wake in violence, submerged in a pool of sweat. The days began blending into one another, and I couldn't tell what was more haunting, the world seen before me, or the one behind closed eyes. It was clear that drinking wasn't doing me any favors, having been desperate to pull myself from a perpetual slumber of at-risk tendency. Nothing short of a strong kick to the groin would suffice, but that deliverance couldn't come from just any commoner. Someone out there had a steel-toe boot cocked back, for me in particular. So, I made way towards Midtown to check out the record store, a taxidermy shop, and a new-age hedonistic haberdashery of toxic positivity. Finally, a vintage clothing and antique wonder emporium called Crackies. This is where everything changed, and life as I knew it would begin again. Upon entry of this off-the-wall establishment, I was greeted by a Zoltar fortune-telling machine. "Zoltar is here to give you the wisdom of the ancients. Do with it what you will," he spoke. "Destiny is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of choice. It is not a thing to be waited for. It is a thing to be achieved. Create your destiny wisely, my friend, and surrender a bit more wealth for more instruction from Zoltar." I sought more promising insight, but he wasn't a debit card-taking gypsy type. No matter, he'd expressed what was needed. The large store was divided into two parts. Clothes to the left, with gizmos, gadgets, what's-its and what's-nots to the right. To a tinkering man, this fork in the road proved a difficult decision. However, Zoltar stood left, just ahead of nifty threads and, of course, destiny. The place looked like someone gave Alice the large pill followed by some ipecac, with ill intent to incite heavy vomiting, having thrown up all the most psychedelic aspects of her trip to Wonderland into that very store. Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit and the Bangles' Walk Like an Egyptian played on a loop. Bizarre decorations sat atop each clothing rack, tailored to the perverted kinks of a dominatrix suffering drug-induced psychosis. Diorama boxes for crochet mice and papier-mâché cats, gold spray-painted mannequins in sensually laced garb, and birdhouses of assorted colors were stacked to the ceiling. All these warped and teetering displays stretched the room like illustrations torn from the outlandish theme of a Roald Dahl novel. My eyes squinted and fingers curled as there was treasure in every direction. I felt to be floating inches above the ground, bobbing and weaving between each rack, eager for that perfect piece to scream out. But it wasn't a fitted vest, suede coat, or polished shoe that would do so. That which called out to me was the angelic voice of a murmuring dork. I've felt to hit rock bottom so very many times in life, reaching for hope which dangles just shy of each fingertip. But in that period, there was no sense in attempts to grasp for it, having fallen too many times to get back up. Everyone is dealt a shit hand at some point, unable to fold and forced to play with no hope of winning. We peer to our cards with apathetic eyes, seeing only what we've been accustomed to loathe. But what's the point in playing? What's the point in living, if believed half dead? For those who know tragedy, one's true life cannot begin anew without acceptance of the pain felt possessed. but more importantly, until learning to forgive ourselves for the resentment carried and damage inflicted because of it, the heaviest burden to bear. It's in these moments of utter desperation where our soul calls out to the furthest outskirts of the universe to request a flicker of divine intervention, one that must be recognized in an instant. Mine just so happened to come from behind the clothing rack of a junk store, when for the first time in my life, I felt to have truly heard my own voice, the one long since forgotten. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" she asked as the heavens above and earth below collided to share a waltz the gods themselves forbid. I'm unsure of the complex science behind time transcending one's reality in the blink of an eye, or what variables factor into why it seems so cliché. Perhaps it's somewhere in the scrap notes of Einstein's theory of relativity, but only visible under blacklight, having been written in his own urine after a twisted Midsummer's Eve on absinthe. Who knows? But one thing's for certain. Someone or something hit pause on that scene's arrow of motion, where I spent both an intimate second and profound millennia putting a finger on how such a goofy tone sounded so recognizable. I wasn't gently touched by some otherworldly messenger, but drop-kicked in the groin by a steel-toed boot that sent me flying back to London's mid-19th century, where I became a romantic Oliver Twist humbled by a bowl of gruel. "Please, sir, I want some more." I turned to find a defiant grin resting below a whimsical stare, like she was screwing with me from the start. As if hearing her voice hadn't left me free-falling through 10 glass ceilings, seeing her sent me flying at full velocity back up into them. Her radiance left me needing a goddamn welder's mask just to keep up appearances. I locked into those sharp, hazel almond eyes which glistened in light like dravite gemstones, having immediately felt to be playing tug-of-war in a game hopeless to win. Weary bags rest beneath them, eyes that had seen the poetry and pain and were subjected to the long and lonely hours just before dawn. Two distinct black lines ran the bridge of her pierced nose like war paint. Ebony brown hair flowed to a smile which could part the clouds of a gloomy day. Black draped her petite frame with combat boots, torn leggings, pleated skirt, and an oversized band tee. She looked like the grungy, punk rock version of a tribal warrioress, one who rebelled against the wishes of the chieftain to uphold her place on the throne, in favor of freedom and adventure across far-reaching lands of mysticism. Either that, or a 1,200-year-old high elf who was banished from Rivendell for practicing the dark arts. There was a spitfire spirit and presence to her which defied the laws of physics, as if she could take away the very breath of the celestials, set constellations ablaze out of envy, and make the great void of space itself feel whole and full of life. I almost feel bad in trying to describe her unrelenting beauty, having sense to fall flat, attempts being pale in comparison. To be frank, language hasn't reached a point in its evolution to find the words, nor are they needed. I could have been staring through her like a cat to the wall for several minutes at that point, awestruck. "Hello," she repeated, laughing. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" "Oh, hello," I said. "Just browsing, thank you. If there's anything I can help you with, let me know." "Well, I'm new to town. What's there to do around here?" "Isn't much," she chuckled. "There's bars, bowling, and skate parks." "Can't skate. My bones have become frail, and I must look after my arthritis." I wish to express that my current interests revolved heavily around taking her by the hand and frolicking like children through a meadow of daisies and dandelions, or eerily tiptoe through the tulips to Tiny Tim's tune. But having worn a bomber jacket with my sleeves rolled up, keeping a cool head was paramount upon this first impression. "What's your name?" I asked. "Celine," she said, smiling. "The moon incarnate, huh? What a whopping dose of responsibility." "I suppose," she laughed. "What's yours?" "Icarus. Icarus McHale." I was in a place so tragic and helpless. Beaten, battered, and broken. Yet still, I spoke to Celine with the confidence of 300 hand-selected Spartan hearts. I can't in my right mind sit here and say a front was put on to impress her. No, since the moment she graced my sight, Celine made me feel invincible, more of a man than those of legend ever knew. Suddenly I was caught in the crossfire of an entirely different, supernatural conversation of which hadn't been spoken, nor took place on this plane of existence. "Hey, Icarus," she said. "It's me, dumbass." "Witchcraft!" I yelled in my head. "What kind of sorcery are you conjuring up?" "You've been looking for me, haven't you? That's why you're here." "This must be some sort of incantation, a most beautiful spell you have me under." Think of us as two halves of the same English muffin, sharing a cosmic toaster. "Listen here, enchantress. I'm in no mental or emotional state to have my chain pulled." "Come back and find me. I'll be waiting." I'd come undone at the quip of an ivory tongue. Amidst that magic moment, in the realm of another far-away land, a quill pen stroked parchment, and a new story began. One which foretold a hero's journey as a boy embarked on an odyssey to challenge his greatest fears, champion his villains within, and surrender to the love and forgiveness he sought. Then, and only then, would he find himself standing triumphant. And so began my very own Once Upon a Time. It feels common these days to hear the phrase, "I remember you from a past life," thrown around by self-proclaimed enlightened individuals. People go on with their ultra-spiritualist mumbo-jumbo about how they distinctly recall being a Mesopotamian healer, Sumerian poet, Tibetan Buddhist, or reigned over ancient Egypt as some pharaoh or priestess. Paint me a cockroach, but I've never felt to be any of those things, perhaps never earning such prestige. I consider myself a man very much in touch with his spirituality, having lived far too many experiences in this life, let alone past. If this is in fact another go-around on the cycle of some sick and twisted karmic hamster wheel, God help me if it isn't my last run. I've listened for meaning, found what was sought, and am delivering the message. I didn't look at Celine in those moments as if knowing her from past reincarnations, but as if our lives, those before, now, and hereafter, were shared as one, having witnessed every aspect of myself, fearful or loving, in the eyes of another. Those ceaseless seconds were spent staring deeper and deeper into an infinite mirror, the great hall of reflection, one which bridged me back to find my soul once more. Within a period of immense suffering and total indifference towards life, I felt a sense of home only known in dreams. Could it have been possible that I'd lived that very same moment before? If I'd been led down different paths, chosen different roads, made different decisions, would I still have found myself standing before her, destined all along? If my life had been any less of a puzzle, would every chance encounter, significant occurrence, tragic ending, or beautiful beginning still lay to fit each jigsaw piece with ease, having revealed her undeniable image? Was I experiencing some psychotic episode? A delusion of mass hysteria having finally boiled over, leaving me mad? Or was it a love which knew no quantum bounds, far exceeding the reaches of my perceived reality? Had it mattered? Not at all. For we were just two halves of the same English muffin, sharing a cosmic toaster. "It was nice meeting you," she said, snapping me from her cobra flute hypnotic trance. "Likewise," I said. "I'll see you around." I hightailed it out of the joint in mental disarray, unable to make sense of the fact that I was just sucked through a wormhole and spit out to a galactic quadrant of cognitive disorientation. Disorientation. I hightailed it out of the joint in mental disarray, unable to make sense of the fact that I was just sucked through a wormhole and spit out to a galactic quadrant of cognitive disorientation. I was feverish with elation. It coursed through my once depleted joyful veins like mania at war with my white blood cells. I began rambling a discombobulated stream of consciousness like Captain Kirk of the starship USS Enterprise. I must assimilate, concentrate, infiltrate. There is no time to lose. It's imperative I get right to work. I paced in all 4 feet of the studio, tapping at the floor with my cane while bouncing convoluted thoughts off an inanimate object. "I found her, monkey," I said. Although the question of who she is not as important as what, and what she is as important as why. Why did I find her? Why now? And why is she so familiar? He looked back with eyes of determination, as if he hadn't spent the previous 2 nights in a haze, grilling plantain peels and pairing them with cheap Cabernet. His dietary needs are on par with that of a runaway hooker fleeing her pimp's malpractice. One thing is for certain, I said. I must work at that Wonder Emporium and discover who, what, and why this Celine is to me. Decent, self-respecting jobs of such peculiar nature require good resumes. So, I need one of which the world has never seen, catered to every fabric of my being. Yes, monkey, if we're to impress, we must challenge the status quo and exceed all societal expectations. Yet how? There's a mystery at hand here, Watson, and I've got to get to the bottom of it. But first, where did you hide that Cabernet? After realizing what must be done, no time was spared in gathering each necessary supply. I worked through the long and stormy desert night, like Dr. Frankenstein stitching together his masterpiece. I had a giant red poster board used for elementary science projects. Each letter of every word regarding my personal information, references, job experiences, and my skills, such as my being a fierce lover with interest in hot action, was cut from popular magazines and stuck to the board like a ransom note from the Riddler. Aside from my name, phone number, email, and address, it was totally untraceable. It was imperative that crackies understood where my heart lay. So, I hot glue-gunned a shattered porcelain Pierrot missing his limbs next to a large face comprised of 2 button eyes, a red clown nose, and a jingle bell-strung smile. It was arguably the greatest work of art ever crafted with 2 hands, leaving Leonardo da Vinci rolling over in his fucking grave. I could see Monkey judging these unusual efforts. I don't want to hear a word on your opinions, I said. You haven't worked a day in your life. All you do is sit at home and smoke my tobacco and cook banana sorbet over a rusty spoon, hoping to chase the great orangutan in the sky, while I'm out there struggling to make a living for us. Now having accomplished the near impossible, it was time to use its powers for the good of mankind. I returned to Cracky's the following day and approached the first employee scene. Hey there, I said. Who do I speak to about working here? I'm the manager, she replied. Fantastic. I'd very much like for you to hire me, and I'd prefer we skip the foreplay. I can get you an application to fill out, she chuckled. That won't be necessary, doll. This here's my resume. Extending my hand towards the mighty sky, I pulled it from my backpack like the sword of Excalibur from the impenetrable stone as the one destined to wield it. Unrolling it delicately, like an ancient biblical scroll of astronomical proportion. You made this just to get a job here? She asked, laughing. Absolutely I did. All right, you start Wednesday. That was that. I made leave with a strut in each step, being sure to give Zoltar a wink. After all, destiny was not a thing to be waited for, but achieved. Holy hot mama. That was a real doozy. I think there's a fucking bobcat praying in that tree. And so I'm gonna scram. Not that I need to scram because I'm wearing snazzy shoes and I can outrun a fucking bobcat. Someone wearing stupid ass hiking boots wouldn't even be able to come close. So fucking get bent. Until next time, thanks for joining us.